This is a vibrato, but that's just like half of what's going on here. The Artificial Blonde is a fairly recent release from JHS, and as you just heard, it sounds lovely. At least I hope you thought that sounded lovely. It started out as something kind of different and then morphed into that Better Than Ezra deep cut sounding kind of thing. I liked it. Anyway, let's start with the basics. This is a vibrato pedal. At this point I've already said vibrato like 3 or 4 times. It doesn't even seem like a real word anymore. But that effect makes the pitch go up and down in a rhythmic fashion with knobs for depth and speed. It's also got a pair of knobs for volume and EQ, which are certainly not necessary, but very appreciated if you've ever gone to hit an effect and felt it land just not quite right in the mix. The real neat trick about this pedal is that it's got a pair of depth and speed knobs, one for the green mode, one for the red mode. Now, these cover the same range. There's nothing this one can do that this one can't, and vice versa. But it's really nicer when you've got 2 different styles of vibrato in mind and you want to go between them. That trick right there is really the genesis of this pedal. It was designed by Josh Scott of JHS to help out Madison Cunningham, who had been adjusting the settings on her JHS Emperor Chorus vibrato pedal on the fly during performances. So he went and made a new dedicated vibrato pedal with 2 settings and a foot switch to go between them. And because it's a Madison Cunningham deal here, you know this thing is just a ton of fun with lower tuned guitars like this Squier Baritone Telecaster. covered the basics, and I kind of rushed through them because you're all smart people. You know how vibrato works. What we really need to get into is how this is a stereo vibrato pedal, because how does that even work? Well, check this out. We're going to start out with just output A, and then just output B. And then we'll bring them both in at once, and then we'll switch the track from mono to stereo. So, yeah, the second half of that clip was very different than the first half. Typically, when you've got a stereo pedal, mono mode is everything funneled down into one channel, and stereo mode lets it play across both sides. This is doing something else. According to this thread on the gear page, Josh Scott apparently said that the stereo output is the cosine of the mono output. Basically, it's two vibratos at the same time, but their LFOs are out of phase. And the discussion might have gone a little more further and a little more constructive of a fashion, but apparently JHS and the concept of a woman playing guitar is still too much for certain corners of the internet to handle, and things kind of broke down from there. But we can check this out for ourselves. If we bust out the Oscilloscope and hook up our pedal to these cute little cables right here. People are always asking about my cables. These were sent to me by Rockstock Pedals. Shout out to those guys. There's a link down in the video description. But anyway, if we set our depth to 0 and send a 100 Hz sine wave into the pedal, we get out on both outputs a 100 Hz sine wave. And that makes sense because the depth of the effect is set to 0. But as we increase the depth, something really interesting starts happening. The difference between them becomes more visible, and we can see the true nature of the effect. It's two vibratos with their LFOs offset by what looks to be 90 degrees. In fact, we can go into the phase measurement tool of the Oscilloscope, and let's go plus minus 180 degrees. We can see that the numbers jump around a lot, but it's all in the positive 90, negative 90 range, which is what we would expect if one of those is lagging behind the other, like it's out of phase. So that all checks out. But let's consider the following. This is sort of a visual representation of the effect. It's not to scale. Please don't get hung up on the specifics. But right now, these are offset by 90 degrees, and that kind of rhymes with what we saw on the scope. What if we were to simply offset them by 180 degrees, like opposite sides of a wheel, and then add back in the dry signal? That's this flat line down the middle right here. That would basically be the Boss dimension effect. And what if we were to add in a third vibrato voice and offset all three by 120 degrees? Hey, remember the Free the Tone Avatar tri-chorus from a few weeks back? All that to say, there's a reason this has a different sound in stereo, and there's a reason it almost starts to take on a chorus type effect. I knew there was a reason I like this thing so much, but I also kind of wonder why they implemented it the way they did, because yeah, I guess you could use like a Y adapter in here to bridge it all down to a mono signal, but I don't think most people will ever discover that stereo voice because most people aren't running stereo rigs, and the instructions don't really spell it out either. For those that do know the stereo secret, and now you're one of them, I really feel like these outputs should be labeled amp 1 and amp 2, where you're just letting those two vibratos ride the slightly different tonal characteristics of two different amps. And for this video, I actually did something I don't normally do. I mic'd up two real amps, my PV Classic 30 and my Roland Jazz Chorus 120. And I'm really glad I did because I think it gave something special to that opening demo jam. I'll also say that if you're noticing any hum or hiss in these clips, that's 100% me not knowing what I'm doing when it comes to that sort of thing. The pedal itself doesn't add any noise. That's all me and the JC120 needing about a gallon of deoxit. We have one more thing to discuss. Just how do they pull this off? Is it a second bucket brigade delay line in here? Is it some sort of filter phase magic? Well, I pulled this apart, I took a look inside, and I see a bunch of op amps. I see a TLP291, that's a quad optocoupler, cool. And what's this over here? Oh, it's a spin semiconductor FV1. So it's using some DSP, but it's also got some optocouplers. If I were to hazard a guess, I'd say there's a clock driving the optocouplers to get our wave, and then there's some phase adjustment to get the cosine of that as well, and then those are used as inputs for the DSP on a pair of pitch shifting algorithms. Maybe somebody in the know can tell me how far off base I am. Whatever's going on in here, it didn't even occur to me that there might be a digital component until I opened it up. On the mono side, it feels like the vibrato channel of my JC120. And the stereo effect, it's up to you whether or not it's worth dragging out a second amp for, but just remember what I said about maybe using two different amps, because that was actually a lot of fun. The JHS Artificial Blonde is available at Zounds.com. Everyone remember, we love Zounds. They were a supporter of this channel from very early on. They've been great to me as both a content creator and just as a musician buying stuff. Use my links down in the description if you can. Really cool pedal, certainly more than meets the eye. Transformers. I'll catch you on the next one. What did that even mean?